All right, welcome to today's MTA Q&A. We're going to be talking about July border review today. So hope everybody has got a comfortable seat and a drink in their hand and ready to sit back for the next hour while we hear about what's new and what we're supposed to be doing with July border reviews this year. With me today, my wonderful panelists here. If you've been to our border review training in the past, some of these people probably look familiar. We have Cindy Dodge, who is our member information liaison, and she teaches at our border review trainings, and you've probably seen her on a number of these Q&As. And then I also have Shila Kiander, and she teaches our advanced training at border review. So you've probably seen her there too if you've attended. And she's the Mecosta County Equalization Department Director and President of the Michigan Association of Equalization Directors. So she brings a wide range of knowledge when it comes to these border review things. And also Rob Thall, he's our MTA Legal Counsel with Bauckham, Sparks, Thall, Seeber, and Kaufman PC. So he'll be around to answer questions later, to help answer questions later when we get to the Q&A part. So with that, enough from me, and I'll send it over to Cindy to help get you started.
Thanks, Mike. So we've kind of broken up this presentation, like Mike said, into a couple of different segments, and my responsibility is to talk to you about how the Board of Review has changed based on the Governor's Executive Order 2020-87. So I will be going over that executive order with you, and then Shila will pick up and talk about all of the traditional responsibilities that the Board of Review has for July and December, and then again the Q&A like Mike had suggested. So first of all, you do want to reference that EO 2020-87. That is the one that initially came out from the governor, where it appeared that the intent was that all July and December, or all July Board of Reviews would be able to hear any types of appeals that normally would come before the March 2020 Board of Review. There was some questions once that EO came out in terms of, well, what if we were able to complete our Board of Review in March? What if we've heard everybody in March? We've had nobody inquire since March that they missed that due to COVID or any other reasons. So there was some questions about, well, do we really need to hear all of those appeals in July that we normally would hear in March? So in clarification of the governor's order, the State Tax Commission came out with a guidance bulletin, and that is dated June 9th, 2020. So both that bulletin, along with the July and December Board of Review bulletin and that executive order, will be available, like Mike said, later in a recorded attachment to the video. So with that, I'm essentially just going to go over the guidance bulletin dated June 9, 2020, because that really does answer all of those questions that came up during or right after the EO was ordered. So again, the very first question on there was, well, the March Board of Review completed their full 12 hours. They closed it out long before, or within days or week before there were any kind of shutdown of the government facilities and or the stay-at-home orders for this COVID pandemic. So do you still need to meet? Yes. Question number 1 in that guidance bulletin says that you do need to meet, even if you do not have any corrections, because often that's the question we get for July and December Board of Review. What if our assessor doesn't have any questions? Do we still have to meet? It is MTA's opinion that you do still have to meet in July and December, even if there are no corrections from your assessor, because someone could walk in with a veterans or a poverty exemption appeal. So that just kind of shuts that question down that everybody does need to meet in July. And even if they don't have any corrections, or anybody that walks in for a veterans or a poverty exemption still may hear appeals from those that could be heard in March. And just as a reminder, those appeals are an assessed value appeal, a taxable value appeal, a classification of property appeal, a denial of a qualified ag that was on the roll the previous year by the assessor, the late filing of the small personal property tax exemption, an amendment to the eligible personal property tax filing, and again, the poverty and the veterans exemption. Those are the things that we typically would address in March and now can again be heard in July. So one of the things I want to kind of bring up here is meeting restrictions. We are all dealing with whether or not we need to have an in-person meeting or we have to have a virtual meeting. And because the July Board of Review is the Tuesday following the third Monday in July, which will be July 21st this year, you know, we may have those restrictions lifted by then, but there are many regions right now that you can only have 10 persons for an indoor meeting or gathering. So I'm suspecting that will be lifted by the 21st and that will become a non-question, but that is something that we are going to want to watch. Just also a reminder that the July Board of Review can flex that date of July 21st if they set by board resolution prior to that to hold that meeting on any other day after that Tuesday. So it would have to be Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday that week. Now, with that said, then the question becomes, well, do we need to publish and notice this new appeal opportunity the same way that we do in March for July? No, you do not. There are no publishing requirements in the newspaper or the other traditional publications that we see for the March Board of Review. The July Board of Review is considered a special meeting of the Board of Review, and therefore it needs to comply with the Open Meetings Act, and it needs to be posted 18 hours in advance. And if your township has a website, you also have to post that meeting notice on your website. So then the next question is, well, that 12 hours, do we have to meet for 12 full hours again in July? No, you do not. But in this guidance bulletin, you will see that the State Tax Commission does give you some recommendations for how long you meet. And basically they say that you should provide, you know, like equal opportunity or enough time. So don't just try to hold this meeting in an hour. You should extend the meeting this year to a number of hours. And they're actually even suggesting that some of those hours would be after 5 p.m. So then the next question becomes, well, what about people appealing in writing? Well, this is a little bit different now for July than what we would have normally seen in March, because at March Board of Review, we know that the Township Board has to pass a resolution to allow people who are residents of the township to appeal in writing. Otherwise, they have to appeal in person. Anyone who lives outside of the township but owns property within the township by right can appeal in writing. But anyone who lives within the township can only appeal in writing if there is a resolution on file. That has also been made a new exception under this executive order, and anyone who wants to come and appeal a March Board of Review type of appeal to July Board of Review has the right to appeal in writing. And there is no need for the township board to pass a resolution for them to do that. They now have the right to do that under this EO. So the other question is, well, what if they already came to the March Board of Review? So, and heard an appeal and were either granted or denied an appeal at March, can they come back again here in July? No, they cannot come back here in July if they were already heard, unless, and I do think that this might be something we want to address with Rob as part of the Q&A, or Shila, I'll let you, either of you handle this, if they come with a different appeal. So for example, if they came with an assessment appeal in March, and now I'm going to come with a classification appeal in July. So that I don't see addressed as clearly in this guidance and or the EO. However, I think that it is implied that if it is a different type of appeal, they could still come to the July Board of Review if they did not already come to the March Board of Review. So we also know that when people appeal to the March Board of Review, that they have the right, if they're denied, to go to tribunal. Well, we have seen some public acts enacted that altered those deadlines for tribunal this year. And Shila is actually going to go over those tribunal dates in her presentation. If a taxpayer protested to the March Board of Review and it was issued, can they still appeal? Again, this is, they cannot come on the same issue. Oh, this is a good one. And actually, we are preparing already for next year's Board of Review, and Shila and I have already to discuss what that topic might be. And as many of you know, we had this most recent catastrophe with the dam breaking and the lake draining and how that may impact all of those properties in that area. So is that something that can be appealed right now to the July Board of Review? No, it cannot, because nothing changes for the 2020 tax year. We are still looking at how the property sat and the value of the property on December 31st, 2019. And that change in property values will be for next year in those flooded areas. So that is not a type of appeal that could come to the July Board of Review. And that's something to remember, because if people want to come appeal like they normally would in March to July, and they are somehow interpreting that their assessment has changed from January 1st until July, that is not something that can be heard. We're still looking at the traditional rules that we use when we look at appeals of the March Board of Review. So does this impact the equalization process for this year? No, it does not. That has already been calculated. Does it impact the millage reduction fraction? No, it does not. That is already being calculated. So both of those questions are also answered in this guidance bulletin. But what does change is the impact on your local treasurer, likely, because it is a July Board of Review appeal. They are not required to use the L4035 to appeal to the July Board of Review, which is the normal petition that you would use to appeal. They can just appeal in writing, and or they can just show up at the meeting and make an appeal. Now, there is some question about, okay, well, it still isn't the L4035 a good instrument to use in terms of knowing what they are appealing and their signature on that form indicating that this is what they want to appeal. So now we have a record keeping mechanism. If your Board of Review would like to continue to use the L4035 as part of your record keeping process for the July Board of Review, you can do that. it is not required. We do know, however, that when you make a change at the July Board of Review and it impacts the taxable value, you still have to use the L4035A, which I'm sure that Shila may mention. So that form is still in place for July if there's a change in taxable value, potentially from the appeal that they are bringing forward that would have typically come forward in March. But they do not have to file a new L4035 with you for the July Board of Review appeal. We did have a question. I've had a question, I should say, just come in randomly about using the designated agents for appealing. We know from March or any other type of appeal that agents or designated agents can appeal on behalf of the property owner. However, if an agent does appeal, this guidance as well as the EO indicate that agents are able to appeal here in July for these March Board of Review appeals. You could have some kind of internal Board of Review policy where the property owner still does need to sign indicating that this agent has the ability to appeal for them. So those types of administrative procedures you can still keep in place. Again, I just want to remind you of that December 31st date. That's what we're working off from for any July appeals from March Board of Review. So is the local assessor going to be required to create a new tax roll? No, they are not. The July and December Board of Review affidavit is the form that you will still continue to use for the July Board of Review. You will not have to recertify the roll using that L4037 like you had done previously. When the assessor gives you the roll, they give it to you certified with that form. When you complete your March Board of Review, you, as the Board of Review, also certify that form and it becomes part of certifying the assessment roll for that year. That form is not going to be required to be used to complete any appeals that are heard in July based on the March appeals. You will just merely use the July and December Board of Review affidavit, potentially the L4035 if you want, and for sure the L4035A to show any changes in taxable value. Then that will go off to your treasurer just like it normally does. That does need to be completed by September 1st, which is a little bit different timeline too than we've seen in the past. Before you had to complete it 30 days after the July Board of Review. And then of course your treasurer will make whatever corrections to the tax bill based on those appeals that you hear in July. Some larger units especially will use what they call an assessor review in March, where they require the person that is going to appeal in March to come meet with the assessor ahead of time, using that terminology as an assessor review meeting. You could still do that here in July if you want, but it is not required to do that. That can be suspended. And even if you do decide, your assessor does decide they want to use that assessor review process prior to your July Board of Review meeting, and nobody is obligated to do that. They can still come directly to the July Board of Review to appeal. They do not have to go through an assessor review first to do that. There are some in this guidance for the assessors who might be online here. Shila may need to address these questions during the Q&A, but there are some guidance in there for the assessors in terms of how they note those adjustments in their CAMA software. They're not March Board of Review adjustments. They would just be a general adjustment like they would normally do for the July Board of Review. And I believe that's it. It doesn't impact the millage rollback and or equalization this year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shila and let her talk to you about all of the other responsibilities that will be required during the July Board of Review. And please pick up on anything I might have missed too, Shila. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try. You did a great job, Cindy. Thank you. And what a great opportunity to review the July Board of Review requirements. Sometimes when we teach at our March Board of Review training, we get all excited and we're all focused on what we do in March, right? And this is an opportunity for us to really review what we quickly cover in March for what our July Board of Review responsibilities are. So I thank you so much for this opportunity. One of the things I wanted to talk about before we begin is the State Tax Commission has several publications that Board of Review members should have in front of them at the July Board of Review. And I'm just going to mention three of them specifically. One is they have a STC Board of Review Q&A, and that's the question and answer, that's the guidance for the Board of Review from the STC. The second one is Bulletin number 5 of 2017, and this is titled Qualified Errors. This, and pretty much I'm going to go through these bulletins today because the Qualified Errors is our publication that tells us what is considered a qualified error. What is the July Board of Review supposed to correct? And the third one is Bulletin number 6 of 2018. That's titled July and December Boards of Review. This talks about some of those things that aren't qualified errors, but are other things that we have the authority to correct through statutes other than 21153B. Some places in statute it says, and you can go to the July or December Board of Review for this, but it's not included in the 21153B that's specific to the July Board of Review. So I would tell you those are 3 documents that July Board of Review members should really have in front of them and review before the July Board of Review meeting. So when we talk about the responsibilities and the and authority of the July Board of Review, it's important that both assessors and Board of Review members understand their responsibilities and authorities that relate to the July Board of Review. So according to Bulletin 6 of 2018, the July and December Board of Review have different authorities than the March Board of Review. Now, from what we've heard from Cindy from the EO 87, right? You're going to have those March Board of Review authorities, but I'm talking about what does the July have the authority to do? And it's a different meeting. We have different authorities. The July and December Board of Review meet to correct qualified errors and to consider appeals related to principal residence exemption, qualified agricultural exemptions, taxable value uncapping, disabled veterans exemption, poverty exemptions. When you think about that, no assessor is perfect. And no Board of Review is perfect, and no taxpayer is perfect. So they come to their March Board of Review and things get missed and things happen. So that July Board of Review and December Board of Review, but they're there to correct maybe some errors that happened. And I'm very thankful that they have that opportunity, right? So we're first going to talk about these qualified errors in the bulletin and in statute. The authority for qualified errors is found in MCL 21153B. And it explains and defines those 8 qualified errors. And when we talk about qualified errors, these are the errors that can be corrected at the July and December Board of Review for the current and 1 year prior. All right, so the current and 1 previous year. So that would be the 2020 roll and the 2019 roll. So the first one is a clerical error. So a clerical error is defined as to correct an assessment figure, rate of taxation, or mathematical computation related to the assessing of taxes. It's also defined as an error of transpositional, typographical, or mathematical in nature. And I think all of us can understand what a clerical error is, right? We have big thumbs when we're typing. We typed in the wrong number. You know, those clerical errors happen all the time. So a clerical error is our first qualified error. The second one is a mutual mistake of fact. Now, a mutual mistake of fact is defined as an erroneous belief which is shared and relied on by both parties about a material fact that affects the substance of the transaction. It can't be a mutual mistake of fact if the assessor says that's not a mistake. So a taxpayer can't come in and say, this is a mutual mistake of fact, and the assessor says, no, it's not a mistake. I meant to do that. That's my job, right? So that assessor has to agree with the taxpayer. They both have to be in agreement that it's a mutual mistake. That's the second qualified error. The third qualified error is an adjustment under 27A4, which is what assessors call recapping. If the parcel was incorrectly uncapped. There really is no official term in statute called recapping. However, if there was a parcel that was incorrectly uncapped, we can recap that. But this will be discussed more a little bit later. The other part of that one is an exemption under 7HH3B, which is a qualified startup business. Now, qualified startup business they have to go to the state, they have to be approved. And so if something happens that they were approved as a qualified startup business, then they can come to the Board of Review, but they will have to have all the paperwork for that. They would have to have all that approval. And there is a bulletin specific to the qualified startup business. I can tell you, Board of Review members who are listening, your assessor will have all of that information if that parcel actually can get that exemption. So then the next one is an error of measurement or calculation of the physical dimensions or components of the real property being assessed. You know, once in a while, the measurement's wrong. Now that can be for a lot of different reasons. It can be that when I went out to measure, the gate was locked, and so I had to do the best I could. You know, there's a lot of reasons for that. However, if there was an error, you can correct that for the current and 1 year prior. The next one is an error of omission or inclusion of the part of the real property being assessed. Now, we're talking decks, things like that. If it's a whole house, you go to the State Tax Commission with a 154, and 154 is omitted property. But for smaller things that are omitted on the assessment roll or that were included that should have been, those clerical errors can be taken care of at the current year, 1 year prior as a qualified error. The next one is an error regarding the correct taxable status of the real property being assessed. Now, this is where a taxpayer can't come in and appeal their exempt status at the July Board of Review. What this is was there an error made when the assessor considered that, and there was an error? For instance, they didn't get the deed on time, the people had filed everything, but for some reason all of the paperwork wasn't together. This isn't enough time for them to appeal that. However, I say that because I'm talking about the July Board of Review, right? You have to refer back to what Cindy said with the EO 87, right? Because that can be heard at the March Board of Review. But in general, at the July Board of Review, it can only be if there was an error in that determination. The next one is an error made by the taxpayer in preparing a statement of assessable personal property. So what you need to remember about that is it can't be an error if they didn't file one to begin with, right? So the usual rule for July Board of Review is you can only correct a personal property statement if they filed one to begin with. However, now that you can hear March Board of Review, right, they can bring a late filing. So under the March Board of Review, they can bring a late filing, but you need to make sure that you hear that under the March Board of Review late filing. It's not a clerical error if they didn't file one to begin with. The next one is an error made in the denial of a claim of an exemption for the personal property under Section 9.0, which is a small business taxpayer exemption. So when a taxpayer files that small business taxpayer exemption, the assessor can take a look at it and say, listen, they have way more personal property than 80,000. They say that, so I'm denying it. And then in the between time, they go out and do an audit, and they get all the paperwork, and they go out there, and then they find, oh, you know what? You're right. So if there was an error in a denial of that claim, that can be corrected at the July Board of Review. Now again, 21153B grants the Board of Review the authority to correct all of those qualified errors that I mentioned for the current and 1 year prior. Now, statute requires that qualified errors be verified by the assessor prior to being considered at the Board of Review. So what that means is, for assessors, anything falling under 53B as a qualified error, we have to review it and verify it, okay? We have to have time to do that. For Board of Review members, this means that if a taxpayer attends the July Board of Review meeting and wishes to be heard on a qualified error, the Board of Review may not be able to act on it because the assessor hasn't had the time to verify it. So I would encourage boards of review and assessors to make sure you have separated somehow. Are they coming for the March Board of Review, or are they coming for the July Board of Review? Is this a qualified error, appeal, or is this a March Board of Review with full authority? And I can't tell you how to do that. I can give you some ideas of how I would do that, but you should really make sure you separate what you can do, because remember, March can only hear current year. July Board of Review for qualified errors can hear current and previous. So make sure you separate what these appeals are, okay? Next, I want to talk about those other matters that can be heard at the July Board of Review. Now, the first part, those qualified errors, were in the qualified error bulletin. Now we have this July and December Board of Review bulletin, and this covers things that the July Board of Review has the authority to hear outside of 211-53B, all right? All of these are found in specific statutes all throughout the General Property Tax Act. The authority of the July Board of Review of these is outside of 53B, which also means some of them have different authorities for different years. It's kind of depends on that specific statute. So it's really important that you follow this bulletin and then the specific statute for that other matter that you can hear. So I'm just going to quickly go through what those are. The first one is the principal residence exemption. The July and December Board of Review can grant a PRE which wasn't previously denied. So it can the assessor couldn't have denied it, the county can't deny it, the Department of Treasury can't deny it. If it was denied by any one of those, the taxpayers have the right to go to the MTT, not to the Board of Review. However, if it's a brand new filing and they should have had it, it's just a late filing, the July Board of Review can grant that PRE, that's a principal residence exemption, for the current and up to 3 years prior, okay? Again, the assessor should have all of the information for the Board of Review to consider in this situation. Also, qualified agricultural exemptions. The July Board of Review can grant a qualified agricultural exemption claim for the current and immediate preceding year if it's a new claim. So if they hadn't had one before and it's a brand new claim, they can consider it as a late filing for the current and 1 year prior, okay? The Board of Review can also grant, review a denial by the assessor for a new claim made after the March Board of Review. So it's kind of funny, we have until May 1st, a taxpayer has until May 1st to apply for a qualified agricultural exemption. And so if they come in after the close of the March Board of Review and before May 1st, that assessor has to either approve or deny it. So if they deny it, then that goes to the July Board of Review. There are bulletins and statute and guidelines that you can look up for the qualified ag. And I can answer some questions if anybody has anything specific there. All right, so the next thing is the taxable value uncapping. There are two uncapping situations that can be considered at the July and December Board of Review. The first one involves a clerical error related to the uncapping of taxable value, and it should be corrected at the July or December Board of Review as a qualified error. What this means is a taxpayer filed a property transfer affidavit and the assessor missed it, all right? If they filed a PTA and the assessor missed it and it should have been uncapped, we uncap current and 1 year prior. That's a qualified error. That's an error at the Board of Review. However, if that taxpayer never filed a PTA, the assessor doesn't bring that to the July Board of Review. They take care of that in their office and file a form with the township treasurer or the county treasurer. And they can go back as many years as they need to, all right? So only if it's a clerical error and they filed all the paperwork does the July Board of Review see a delayed uncap. Well, it's not called a delayed uncapping. It's called a clerical error in uncapping. The second one, and I spoke about this a little bit earlier, but if a property was uncapped by the assessor and later the assessor determines that it shouldn't have been uncapped, there wasn't a transfer of ownership, the taxable value of the property can be adjusted, shall be adjusted at the July or December Board of Review, and it can be done for the current and up to 3 immediately preceding years. See, so we're out of that current and 1 year prior. This one can be corrected current plus 3, okay? And that's found in the uncapping or the transfer of ownership statute, 21127A. And there's also guidelines and bulletins for that uncapping. The next one I want to talk about then of other things that the Board of Review can do are the disabled veterans exemption. This isn't new. The July Board of Review can hear disabled veterans exemptions. What we need to remember on this is if the March Board of Review heard it, the July Board of Review can't hear it. If it's been heard by a previous Board of Review that year, it can't be heard again, all right? Which means you can't act on it. So we also need to remember that the disabled veterans exemption can only be heard for the current year. We cannot go back on for previous years on disabled veterans exemptions for any reason. The other one similar to that would be the poverty exemption. The poverty exemption has always been able to be heard at the July Board of Review if it wasn't heard previously at the March Board of Review that year, right? And also you can only hear the current year. You can only approve for current year. You can't go back any other years. The only other thing I want to add, and this isn't in that bulletin, but the qualified forest program is an 18 mil exemption. Well, -2, they have to pay 2 mils. But this is all done through MDARD, Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. If by chance a taxpayer was approved at the state and the assessor missed it, specifically in their statute for qualified forest, this can be corrected at the current and 1 year prior if the assessor missed putting that on the roll, all right? So those are the other things that, that the Board of Review can hear. And I know that's a lot of information, but the July Board of Review has quite a bit of authority to correct qualified errors. And don't you think that's good that we can correct those errors? I do. I think that's good. Now, it's equally important for assessors and Board of Review members to understand what they can't do. And if you take a look at Bulletin 6 of 18, there is a whole list of things you can't do. I'm not going to read them all, but I do want to tell you, you can never hear a poverty or a veterans exemption for a prior year. You have to know you can't do that. You can never hear anything that was already heard at another Board of Review, right? You can't rehear things. Let me see. If a PRE was denied, you can never hear a PRE, and boards of review can never deny PREs that are currently on the roll. That's done by the local assessor or the county or the state. Okay. I just want to quickly talk about how property tax administration mainly falls on the assessor, but the Board of Review plays a large role in that local assessment administration. And the AMAR review has 2 questions related to the Board of Review, specifically the July Board of Review. And the questions are, did they grant exemptions under 211.7U, which is the poverty exemption? And what they ask you is, did you grant them, and did you follow the requirements from your local policy? All right, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but that's your responsibility as a Board of Review to follow those local requirements of that poverty exemption guidelines that's approved at that local level. The second question is, Does a sample of the July and December Board of Review actions indicate the board met requirements at 21153B and only considered those they had statutory authority? So those two bulletins that I went to that tell you what you can do, you aren't supposed to step out of that authority at the July Board of Review. Now, I know that seems funny because Cindy just went through all the things you could do now, but only for the 2020 2020 July Board of Review, which is why I think it's really important that you separate. Is this a July or is this a March Board of Review, right? Appeal. I just want to encourage Board of Review members and assessors to remember that July Board of Reviews, those meetings, it shouldn't be a rubber stamp machine. Assessors should supply boards of review with the documentation that they need to make those decisions, right? They've had to do it. They've had to do that research and verify it. So they should supply that to the Board of Review so they're looking through it and can make that decision. I can talk a little bit about the requirements of the records, but pretty much, Cindy, you nailed it.
Yeah,
So,
and Shila, how about just real quick before we start the Q&A, could you, because in the EO I had mentioned, and in the guidance, there were those changes in tribunal.
yes, I
Filing
will
with
do
the
that. Yep.
tribunal and state tax commission. If you
Yes.
could review
I will
those real quick.
do that. So the normal appeal at the March Board of Review and July Boards of Review and December Boards of Review you get notified within a certain amount of time. So for the March Board of Review, you have to be notified by the first Monday in June, taxpayers, and in July and December, it's 30 days. And then they have the right to appeal to the MTT, but the deadline to appeal to the MTT is July 31st. Well, Public Act 88 of 2020, which was signed into law, amends the Tax Tribunal Act. And now a taxpayer has the right to appeal, and the deadline is September 1st of 2020. So it's this year only, and they've extended that right to appeal to the MTT to September 1st of 2020.
So I was just going to address, Cindy had the question about rehearings or reconsideration at the July Board of Review. And so you can't rehear or reconsider an issue that was raised in the March Board of Review, but you can, if it's involved in the same property, if it's about a different issue that was ruled on in March. So I suppose, just thinking about it, you could take an exemption claim to the March Board of Review, and they could rule that it was not exempt. Then now, because everything's moved to July also to take up March Board of Review issues, you could bring up the issue of valuation at the March or at the July Board of Review. So as long as you're not rehearing or reconsidering a decision by the March Board of Review, if it could have been done in March, you can still do it now at the July Board of Review.
Correct.
Thanks,
And
Rob.
one other thing I wanted to add too, and Shila talked about the poverty exemption, you can only hear it once. That is true, which means if you deny it in March, it can't be heard again in July or December. However, many of you that have been in our class, you know we talk about tabling a decision on the poverty exemption for various reasons, because you don't have enough information, and for situations may change. There's lots of things we talk about why you might want to table that. So tabling a discussion about a poverty exemption to July or December wouldn't be the same as denying it and trying to bring it back here in July under this new EO order.
It looks like we're starting to get some questions in, so we'll try to get to as many of those as we can here in the last few minutes. So the first one that came in, and Cindy, I know we get this question quite a bit, so maybe you'll want to handle this, but it says, I'm the assessor for 6 units in 4 counties. How can I have a July Board of Review session open for a few hours in each unit in one day?
So that is a really great question. So I think what you're probably going to have to do, because remember I said that the July Board of Review can be flexed to Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. those assessors may need to ask some of those units to flex that date to Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, so that they can make sure that they can get through each one of those units' Board of Review. Would you agree, Shila?
Yes.
And Rob?
Yes, yep, I would agree.
I would also say, I think a lot of assessors really want to attend those, although it's not mandated by statute. They might have that in their contract with their local unit. So it may be a struggle to get that done, but I agree with you.
The next question says, they said that they received an appeal a week after the March Board of Review closed. They received it by mail. Do I now address this at the July Board of Review meeting, or do they need to reappeal it at that meeting?
Well, I'm going to let Rob pick up on that. The legality side of that, I think that it's more of a customer service issue, because you likely have already given them some kind of written notification by that June date to finish up your March Board of Review. So as for a courtesy reason, you might want to reach out to them and let them know that this has opened up and they have the ability to come now.
Yeah, I would agree that you should reach out to them, since they have filed late, to let them know that they can come to the July Board of Review to have the matter dealt with, or I would just deal with it at the July Board of Review, one of the two.
Thanks. The next one, I don't know if we'll have an answer for this, but they're asking, will the July Board of Review answer sheets in BS&A be updated with the 9/1/20 date?
Let me try and answer that one. I have not got an answer from BS&A on that. Here's what I know. They have to be entered as an adjustment, so a July Board of Review. And what I have told the assessors is, you pick the best reason at this point. We may get an update from BS&A. I would have you email them. Email BS&A. They may give you an answer to that, and it wouldn't surprise me if they update our system to be able to take care of this. So there's the answer. I don't know.
Thank you. Next question here. For qualified errors that need to be corrected before the July Board of Review, is a petition signed by the property owner required?
I can take that one. So, and then you guys can help if you want to add to it. So usually a July Board of Review, except for the PRE issue, PREs are supposed to have a signature from the taxpayer, but it's not like the March Board of Review. They don't sign a 4035, right? The 4031 is what it's called. It's just signed by the Board of Review. That's why I think you need to separate your March Board of Review and your July, and your July Board of Review qualified errors and your March Board of Review that are being heard because of the EO 87, right? So I guess I would, Rob.
No, I would agree with what you just said.
Yeah. Okay.
Perfect. So the next one, this can probably be, it says, so MTA does not mandate a specific number of hours that the July Board of Review needs to meet. So we won't have a mandate on it. It would come from the state, but I don't believe that there is a required number of hours. We would just recommend have it available for enough hours that, it's not an open and close type thing.
Correct. They just, in their bulletin, they give suggestions of extended hours, and it would be nice to have something after 5.
So I would just also note that there's always this overriding concept that if you don't give somebody a chance to present to be heard, or there's insufficient notice, or the review process is futile, under those circumstances, they can still appeal you to the MTT, or if appropriate to the STC, and make a challenge under that basis. So I think you need to provide at least enough access so that people cannot be making that claim that you denied them the right to present their claim.
Perfect. This next question here, and I don't know assessing lingo, so I'm not sure what QZ stands
I
for,
think
but
they mean QA, qualified ag.
oh, gotcha. Okay. So it says if the qualified ag comes in before May 1st, the assessor can make a determination and does not need to go before the July board of review. Is that?
That is correct. That is correct. The deadline for the qualified ag is May 1st. And so if a new filing comes before May 1st, that assessor has a responsibility to make that decision to approve or deny it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This question says, do we have to contact businesses that filed a 5076 late and inform them they can take it to the July board of review?
Again, I'm going to say customer service. Shila?
You know, if they filed one late, I would contact them. I mean, how many do you probably have, right?
Right.
If they filed one after the March board of review and didn't get it in, I think I would let them know, hey, you can appeal this to the July board of review this year. Just like that late personal property.
Thank you. Yeah, and I didn't move forward in the chat far enough, but they did say that they meant qualified ag.
Yep.
So let's see here. We got a few more questions. This person says, I have a commercial property in my township that transferred ownership in May of 2020. The previous owner failed to file their 5076. Can the new owners file the 5076 at the July board of review?
Shila?
Anybody?
So if we break that down, a commercial property has to file by February 20th. And if they don't, they get to go to the March board of review. I don't know how owner that didn't own it then could apply, but I can see how this could be heard, because if the prior owner applied, they could get it, right? This is tricky.
And sometimes when you have a tricky question, Shila, is the best resource then is to reach out to the State Tax Commission on how to handle it?
Sure. I mean, how would you handle this at the March board of review if somebody purchased it in February? Right? Because remember, tax day is December 31st. So they didn't own it December 31st. They're the new owner. How would you handle that in March? Right?
I think you might also want to discuss that with your township attorney too. And how to handle it.
And a lot of times when it comes to uncapping and those deed transfers and that, I mean, even in class when we teach, you've all heard many a times that those are litigated. There's all kinds of case law out there on uncapping a property. And yes, working with your attorney is definitely always advised.
Thanks. And so, somebody commented for those that will listen or watch this later on, somebody commented and said that regarding the BSNA report that you can edit the July board of review notice and put in the September 1st date on it. So if they don't update it, they're saying that you can go in there and manually do it yourself.
Right. So they're talking about the answer so that they have the right to appeal. Yep.
So next question here for the PRE request, is an email sufficient or do you need to have a signature on that?
So I'm not an attorney, but I like to play one, right, when we're on webinars. What I have seen in practice is email, letter, a form, any of those are a proper appeal by a taxpayer.
Right, because it's considered in writing. I mean, I don't know, Rob might want to jump in on that, but email is considered a writing.
I would agree that if they email it, it would be appropriate to act on it.
Good. I wanted to go back to that 5076. You know, in assessment administration, we would like to think that we have all this guidance and we have all this statute and we can pull out bulletins and things should be black and white, but they're not always black and white. And we get these different circumstances that come in that we've never seen before. And that's when we have to kind of dig in And that's why we don't have all the answers to every specific question that comes, because that isn't specific in statute. So when you do that, digging in and asking your attorney is going to be the best thing, because you're not always, the state tax commission is probably going to send you to the Bulletin. That doesn't answer your specific question, but you would like to think it's black and white, but it's kind of gray sometimes.
Yeah. Now with that, that ends the last question that we have, but I'm going to take my host privileges and ask one more question, because it's a question that I received quite a bit. And because the notification requirements are different than March border review, where a lot of focus is, I'm going to pose that, but notification requirements for those July border review meetings. And Cindy, I know you probably get the question quite a bit too, but if you can just touch for a quick second for those out there that would be noticing the meeting or whatever, what are the notice requirements for the?
Right. And I actually, if I was going to get another 2 seconds, I wanted to mention, because it is in the guidance bulletin or memo, that you do not need to send out new assessment notices for the July Board of Review, because we know that the assessment notice is one of the elements of notification, or the first notice to the property owner that they do have these rights to appeal. We do not need to do that in July for anybody that wants to come for March Board of Review appeals to July. So, you know, again, I'm going to go back to customer service. If you want to put it on your website, if you want to send out a postcard, all of those things are going to be up to likely your township board, how much further they want to go other than the special meeting notice. In the special meeting notice, again, under the Open Meetings Act, is an 18 hours in advance notice posted where your postings are typically, and on your website if you do have an active website.
I would just also add that although the 18 hours is a minimum notice, you should try to provide as much notice as possible to notify your residents and taxpayers.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you, Shila, Cindy, and Rob, for joining us and hopefully answering a lot of questions. We have hit 1 o'clock, and I think we're out of questions. For those of you that are joining, you may see names at the bottom, Amy West and Shelly Cardenas, and they're part of the people that make this go off without a hitch, hopefully, and help put this thing on for your information. So I'd like to thank them too, and thank everybody for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you at our next Q&A. So with that, have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.